tonight on behalf of the company and management of this theatre.
Aniel Moran Sgeulachd in illa Yalit an Opa.
Se character gyma einach was in Deacon of a show, agus va iwma tuvrish.
Ga putting at in a machtje den Javan, Hane, den Javan, ben a year.
The difficulty about a double life is it seldom divides itself in two equal halves. Bits of the one side are stronger, or bits of the other. And as time went on, Brodie becomes deeper and deeper involved in the darker side.
I think Edinburgh loves to push its dark side. It'll always be told. It's one of the staple stories that they tell, because it's a cracker.
But what I find personally a bit odd about the fact that he was hanged is that he was not a murderer.
Mearlach sa mi hala tolle hien naar a heitje glachgug. Agus charwe dat na beter reality gan Deacon Brodie.
He has a pub here under his name. In Dundee, there's a pub under his name. In New York, there's a pub under his name. And, you know, it's a very, very well-known name. So let's tell the story, I would say.
Royal Mìle Dùn Eideann na tharraing fawr gan y milleanan to luchd-turais a taobh Leibheala seo hula bliadhna, le buscairean, bùthan a reich Gaelic ac yn cainneachí agus clobhsaichean beaga dorcha gach taobh na tráid. Ha taobh gan y dúine ha stats o'n drama y tyn ystau seo, y t-sràid enamel ag Deacon Brodie. Ach sŵl cyfiad a ha gael pyn ystau seo ag fel ffys gyda'r Deacon a chrochwch son acre.
Nobody wants to hear about some ghost that was seen once 250 years ago. So we tend to stick to stories that are factual, that actually happened. They've got to have a gruesome element, they've got to have a nasty element, and of course Deacon Brodie is absolutely perfect for that.
Ydy hyd lai yn y Tavern an y seachtia ceith ficit hoch, chai Brodie a chrochwg y son merle y sio as y lawn market. Noch barach gynnu y iechgyn y chrochwg na chwnwchgys y son imydach bliadhna. Chosich y hen chwnwch roich as y mwydach y ber, le falt fwrtain lawn fwter. Cdiach thicker o'ch stocha y son ber cho anasach. Can I cwtgar an eith Brodie chai Sgeulachd ag Jekyll agus Hyde ysdeachig, ach co agus gysron na hatúine as y fale far y dechrau cho misylydd. Sio Sgeulachd ag William Brodie, dynia ag yr otor di chawl. Fa William Brodie daichet y Sgeulachd na chai chrochwg. Chofat y sanigyn, chat y hosich edi ffornarst gwsreti Michael yr daichet. Ha Sgeulachd dochritsinich. Arish, Chef Rosnich, Robert Louis Stevenson, gus cruachig in character, schizophrenic enamel, Jekyll and Hyde.
We merken we tolle durst en taghal, ik een naam. Tron la na Jekyll, naar Kruig, agus na Ertulich, agus Troneiche, afvalaf. Na verlig, agus na leitere.
He was bourgeois, he was respectable, he was the sort of person whom the criminal classes, who were taken to be the same thing as the poverty-stricken classes, the working classes, he was the sort of person to whom they were supposed to look up.
Rúcadh William an na 16 taigh-seinnse na meachcha behinne ag Francis Brodie a bheith na Wright Burgess agus a bhein Cecil Grant.
An Deacon Brodie na chéitiste de nanne me daseach súla tú gine per seclas van a chane sinna bhain nítid. Sé van a décanach dunne bheits caun únig a vercúrst as na láich na bhain.
Chanil móra nid aharach agus na sean chlobhsaichean echtrial ag Royal Mìle, vagudig a Sgeulachd Brodie seo.
When Brodie was alive, the Royal Mile was quite something. It was probably the most densely packed bit of land in Europe, and long after the rest of Europe had cleaned up their act, Edinburgh remained a very medieval kind of town. At one point it was estimated that something like 80,000 people were crammed into a little mile-long strip. It was filthy. There was no sewage system.
Sannig na dunne bersteach a bheith lábhanúchar as lád characús cét ag na dunne bochga bhí a tortameach céinar cúsin. Na trúgan bheach gar I dhéanú mar a déag íoríor agus am cinneach an na seag sé sinna gag go mearlas cealacarachgus cúsin mar sinna dal.
Edinburgh was just horrendous. Great news for ghost tours. Great news for any kind of tours, but not so good for the people who actually lived here who were trying to make an honest living. Deacon Brodie wasn't one of them.
Sé dunne bhain wat a gúne mai Dún beaga henner an Dùn Eideann na luchd-turais animal agus anichte agus bheith as bheith grách móraice sé críasí bhain go hánaid denú Arners he agus plisachan as cabinetan sa le tren. Ba teolach gastan agus ormach agus spéisiú agus uad Deacon Brodie Rìoghail.
We know very little actually about the beginning. He seems to have been educated in local schools. It may have meant a perfectly good education, but we're not talking about something in some well-known public school of the type that became so famous in the 19th and 18th centuries.
He was obviously well educated. You can tell that from the letters that he wrote. He was quite erudite and well educated, and he then aspired to the same kind of prestige as his father.
No je wasig ahal an na 16 céadmhiche taghal is a dinnes tuchtimach gaharich a bheith tour.
Na de chuige laad ga ik innewas mór ecke, berstes Rìoghail as na láich na bhain ga ik 10 milleanan an a nadike de bhain, s ga ik go céir teinike a warach de grách.
Chofad se chimis a higus mi charoscialeg a hyrwyr y sosiadoi behe fegi fach a stoch gyfforstanwch chwchyle mas danig leitirwydyn ymach gan ffwbl.
Ga je glausen as a ra a Sgeulachd Brodie a fuideach anamach agus a dúi. Cára a de chlú agus a ninnewe vec a Sgeulachd an a Dùn Eideann ag a naun. Le tára decket agus eolus tar va William og a lental aheid. Ag figet blunna gúis, chai trades councillor a bhuilachagid, agus gudit a stúisein Deacon of the Rights.
That a phrase such as a deacon, which we would associate in Roman Catholic speech with somebody which was halfway to a priest, would be applied here to be the leading figure of some profession or other, kind of a cross between a trade union role and an old medieval guild role. So he would be somebody who would be looked up to by his fellow builders and being made Deacon of the Rights.
Charogw has a lava sin gymwchor gan y ffobl y fyr a siof yng nghorlech a hames y geri, charogw hyr y leit sin.
Mae fel swych yn ac ydych corn y fele, na basig o't mwysian y fi pen ei cronch o fele dy ianw. A ys y barach gyda sian sanach y fa ei antoi arnes, na dianw arnes, y ber fa Dùn Eideann. Se bennichte, se bennimele.
And he had this partly because of his father, but partly because he was a very, very capable man. He wasn't in any sense what nowadays tends to be most unfairly called a cowboy builder. He was somebody whose work you could rely on. Mr. Brodie was head of his profession, so to speak. Means building cabinets, but also building houses.
The sawdusty workshop in Brodie's Close attacked the senses and made his thin lips smile. It smelled of fresh wood, boiling fishy glue, resin and lacquer, and it sounded a busy place. Saws ripping, hammers banging, planes sighing, man-to-man shouting. That was basically the birth of Edinburgh's new town in 1766 when he was a tender 25, and it meant a new surge of big business.
Haramoran mava dat ited y dochwmal y Deacon Brodie. Charaike a chogolydd cewn y chosni agos a hen oprach y sŵas. Ach farwt yn illa y tharraing adie William Brodie.
My next scene is a tavern.
Gwydig Brodie fi'n a gwynio leomach spatal leis yn 10 mille ag ahadeke forstan ag ymawn. Fa Brodie na fawl gen y clwb The Cape, clwb fan ach gag na bwyl di morad. Ach tro wnio chael Brodie wy as y chip, yn adysien fi adol gyda singe chlwydych y fanyg dy farsiant y fian, an the flesh market close fasg i Royal Mìle. Adysien all anamach y steinche y clwy charstien agus disien, van Deacon i dy goi glon.
He seemed to like the sort of dangerous side of life, and it was a sort of psychological problem he seemed to have. He wasn't entirely happy being 100% respectable person.
Wat techner se deolach ag Brodie ach at aranig uis ach dafiúr. Wat teiu gin y goppelga mar bentea ach ar data his eichgische devig edis tronlinche. Gaat de harin edekut njo clw yn Deacon het falafan Royal Mìle, fer robega de vek dunje boch agus berstich.
The closes were very dark. The closes were very sinister places. In fact, the Royal Mìle was an extremely violent area, despite the fact that it was the central part of Edinburgh. And the grass market especially, that was an absolute den of iniquity.
We get kudurk a dolhen gamli. Speg traum is a dice agus na castun. As a dillav ja run a dillav dar kei as a na his on hands a dish of the isle na stochnen sheet as na broken buchgeloch as the huwe de borst door Rìoghail as klanichen as a beget de krage dish as custom the borst.
To be a gambler, therefore, was something which quite a number of respectable people did, but they were expected to be able to control their losses. In actual fact, in a sense, it meant that instead of being a good, respectable bourgeois, you were aiming too high if you splurged your money. Brodie was something of a snob, and ultimately he got to the stage that he was losing more than he could afford to lose.
A mi cynnig gymig gols, fi gael nhw o chwle cael y figdol leis y siosio I a fa sin. Agus, leis y na siosio persio fe gyda ni sio. Y naiche, fe mwys, fe bahleis y fi tord galion le eregyd gobi hynna'n mor fi gach gnwyr at fi calich y sapet.
Brodie took to a revolting sport, at least we would have the sense to say so today, of cockfighting. It was really horrible. It meant that the cocks, the roosters, pecked each other's eyes out, and you bet money on your rooster as opposed to somebody else's. Now, it was still going on very thoroughly in the early 19th century. We've only got rid of it relatively recently. It was a foul business and extremely cruel. And Brodie wagered money upon his own rooster, who seems to have let him down fairly continually.
Fyd a fi, go roi cawl tor edicid. Mae'r bygaid a fi cawl yn edicid, fa dedicid a fi awn, ag eich anhawl, mae'r rhaid fa cew yn edicid. Agus, fe stoch yn a ffiwch yn cwtiwch, hw fi ddysgu cemachan.
Ag yn o'n nawn fe trang tr'n bla, y ffdihalig tor.
Brodie evidently exuded this quality of trust, and the fact that you knew where he came from, using the word in the favourable sense, the term in the favourable sense, I kent his feather, that meant a lot.
He was also a locksmith. That gave him access to very rich people's houses. He was able to make impressions of their keys. He was able to mess around with their doors and locks. And that meant he could come back at night and rob them.
Ie, mae gen pegar o hon go i'r chorigan ar fan herigyd ag rwy ymach. Agus biadhna fi gael mach safel gen y hiwchrichen.
He gets more and more keys, and it would mean, of course, that the operation of burglary would become a very simple one.
Sylwn ystol triffigyd y hoch chaipdys i gystod y fanc y vale agos chai och ciad nocht y gyd. Fe sylwyd gro uwchwyd ffwyd yn y cwdigyn is yn ffein ystod, a chadiach y merlich y glach gydiaf.
Ach, smynich i ddasig y groch y ddirst, a dwi'n i cynnych y gro yn deacon iddo fi copyd at y fanc. Agus, ac yn am o sien, fa troch clechgach gyhorig uwchwyd yn aatio fa'r ca crochwg eis cwl dar ys y mwy. Agus fi ys yn y ffalaf agus bocs ac ys y lan pohdi. So fi togol i am ein y hwchrichen agus fe o feichgylwch mae yw'n iam yn y hwchrichen gyro mwlwch y bocs gos na trach ag yn iam ai y filig.
Och, fi geg i'r brysdiwysteg an yn Hyde. Fi geg yn uwch an yn ceir ffat sy fe ein. Fi geg mach safel ag ianw. Agus, fi geg tîns dyrch yn uwch as o lasir yn eich so cwsiach gystoi. Agus, sy'n ag ag rech o sirifachal mar fiarnach.
That was one of the things that frightened people in the course of the trial. The sudden discovery that what had seemed to be a self-secure, security-protected society was one which was actually much more open to looting and burglary than if it had been in some of the wilder reaches of, shall we say, London.
Fa dynia misal e Deacon, agos fi ga trich gefein fia chygol go bia conod I dynia spatial gwneidyn. Fa sio corstadis, dynia efin yr ymsych y chynnig yr arish di Robert Burns. Agos nid hannig ag o gwf, cara y foionach gos y fi leor gan y dyniog sio. Yr college ba cyw da foionach ag fat flionichen.
Marriage certainly was an extremely important role, a very important career move, as one might say. Brodie obviously enjoyed the company of mistresses. We don't know how many he had. We can be pretty clear that he wasn't limited to one or even two.
Va trúid chluinnig ag conad I té Anne Grant, va tí séleg ag conad I téle Jean Ward. Harach cóig minútin échtar cosiach a chapannig a bhchéile.
Chat y ffos hwnach fa tiolach yn ag leis y níoseach och hecolach nach rosgial ag ywfod yn charin héile.
Everybody knew each other. Everybody was in touch with the latest gossip. And how he got away with not only having 2 separate relationships and 5 children, 3 of them to one woman, 2 to another.
He was a slight man. He had a scar down one side of his face and apparently a lazy eye as well. So how he managed to get 2 mistresses to bear him so many children is beyond me. But He had to have charm.
Ma sé Deacon a gach 8 ciad nacht van wanke le uchuid voertuin, a stui féin jellish, há sich siar as staan. Agus va gamblig is greimenid.
Fim sin cynnych y gwraerwy am gretchen 3 tehen an yn Eideann eis chavig sin súridir far hen va fiúr conledish eis va gach ielain far ronne badenich agus a chlein a vekker I hogal kutjach. So va koske sin morid yn ynne agus van perse va sio. Stoch frikert makar iru a sjorse dói behe va jiher ar son hen a chumal Dírach as a stail de sreigéirí vi clechte.
And so he plunges deeper. This meant that the very people he was rubbing shoulders with and betting against were clearly many of them from much lower ranks in society, and several of them looked quite clearly smelt, sounded as if they had lived lives among the criminal classes, to put it no strongly. And Brodie gets to know some of them and gets the hint from them, you've been losing a lot of money. If you want to gain some back, well, there are ways to do it.
At sa vedi fornast, but dun has the fenkin Brodie mar gunje Sgeulachd sa valla.
A lachrúis as a dunne, a lac in Indian, agus vi fallaf agus dói uamstach leamachige. Agus a sorsa údre vi clechge, a dún an vi mar sin an oorsan fallaf sé macaroni gan tú.
Vi curir seachgatin an dahan spadial san stuhun spadial goromas, vi Brigis jaller agus vi gang háni I géri vi a ced gema spadial a mi cynnig mar vi ges mwynich gro yn driach eis yn iefau veg a hyn feg la reis mwynich gro ari y sin.
Vi falt fynnydd agus vi at rhiasinnigheid, vi disaf ddiaes, stochen in die aan gelappen broken moren boeggeloch, jaarserste.
And that would contrast with what he would then wear in the evening as a burglar, which was everything was dark. And he hid behind a mask, of course, and a dark hat and dark clothes.
Agus vi fallabs dói cosach vacarach she was a t-sràid. So vi seen they láin a bheol a bríon an dói anar brach maul agus mar go bhí hencatal so a bar bheol mar go bhí fihanní bhí bríon colch in Huirslin.
He also was fond of something which traditionally Scots were supposed not to like, which was the theatre. Brodie was a great theatre man, and in certain ways he modelled himself a bit about theatrical heroes.
Hij had wij kolloch bij Brodie gani te lachen te la vliegen waan. Dus ik kan het beggars opera. Hij is aan hen met jongen wie toen we gaan rappedag hij had zich in Turkish. Hij is bij Kamode de Gael dus zo had ik bij Galoren is goni.
Hij is fator corruptus gehelten as een opera was sin he kolch hij stokker sin genoeg sin ideas geher toch maar gutige weg heen oprechog.
Va Brodie chorus taigh-seinnse must the hosh die Mìle Rìoghail drochangus ag dunne me jöid.
Sin vi clwynial gan yn nid sio gyro yn deacon o gwbl le sien. Och am I cynnych gan gas y sgil a fi gwbl le hens le siens gas ge misnachal.
Ystawrig Sgeulachd ceithig y sia noch sasnach anasach as y ffnia bala. Stoch go bich gráinchen tiúnda gemach gemat defrite, mar a héin agus Brodie is cynnych I di chéile. Sé cennych is siúil a Berkshire van na George Smith, na de rannig Dùn Eideann ga bheith lodsig an na t-sràid Hendersons sa Grassmarket.
Nest de jooste we zijn we sabbat hulligen. Agus we deken het alles zijn. Agus aan de hagen dat die mag gewoon. Agus de gewoon dus zo'n hukje in de griezige glassen van. Ik nou. Kun je zo'n ja we deken renaissance.
Brodie met him there and realized that he wasn't well financially and he wasn't well physically, and he realized that this man was in bad condition, therefore he might be susceptible to a bit of enterprise, and indeed he was.
From one point of view, you can rather see why figures like Smith were anxious to encourage Brodie, because he would have expertise that they didn't have. Above all, he had professional capacities to abuse the confidence that was given in him by the people, the owners of the houses, that he would be burgling.
Agus we get vanaf kool, achtlich en nachtlich, het veel geneten, kan je te maken zo'n aardje en een jaar grappige.
Va bear y cwmal trang, y tharraing yn da chwyd gneamach ysyn agus ten prifydych as y diang fala yd y starsach geheen, a charosio gasasachig agus va decon y sir as dan, dro yedig ceid figet y sia, va tharraing gyman y smó van erga.
Of life, each neighbor abuses his brother.
Va Brodie eolach torgen het duine vi gael roppigig, as na sechken in magedig an na sechtia keid figet de sia, ga je heen agus George Smith a gut va boe marsanta oor, agus verder vi gericht ten bachke. Een neger dan nolik, gut je de doavas va boe en braden brus, na luib, Eideann, fanichen, agus glasaken munjal.
Kun je gevat een oorzaak zoals het hier schillen?
Wat John Brown teachig va wien 6 blion go Sgeulachd in Australia ar son Mìle. Vi gan Dùn Eideann raken ek diasich van ach ve kosk unje a gamblig an a t-sràid sa Grassmarket. Verstuwd Brodie has ik at de gamas in Mìle na Bavon, a tharraing na carriage en berstich a gedeken. A chanatje wie ouders zich met jeun, zo'n wat chen het er barg goepit.
So the irony of all of this was that he perpetrated the crimes, and he then got more business out of replacing the locks again. So it was a delicious irony for him, but I don't think it was for the owners of the shops.
Hamis muinich kun chretor immerkin agus mi géint mis muinar en jana vale leis an dáas roidean u viarle eke wat de nul gereit doch gerei na dunje boch gerei taisne wat alles te gan na dagen en se falla den na kroichen garote tikschen en he huiter.
Va kerir Eunice as a fach Mìle, Brodie agus na duine a va goepich college, Smith, Brown agus Ainsley. Sé níana siúg George Smith as a chúst, a nó jarafig hakin i de néker a len. Ga chóla sin a gár me jeun Mìle chun a diaw la diac an lúnastal 16 céad figet a sech. Ga een gerir sias go líte, post trang ac yn awnsen. Fyddi se dystau I fw grosed le uwchwyr Mìle. A chane edeg ydy fe fanergaif dyrysio, ach ti.
Agus chro cael idir nach beged John nach a gut, gaharid na meg luachain, agus aniu, chanel sin yw cwrna hasin dy luach as yn ti. Och, as lava shit sharut gemal luach var, was yn hys charoich o palt sa hain yw.
Galafat le 300 go le púnd gen díú a bear. Vrú at a dí brein da fascan, chuid at innan it fallach an a sette is an a hoca le díist, agus ugat a déle go taibh Brodie. Chan fis té hachad gan dí, nio té huaid at a dehon. A stower, shecht die keet fiket a shech, ga een pachke werlich is as a project is lotter na haast. A show, ek alle Dùn Eideann.
If ever they commit one folly, they're sure to commit another.
Colch gorá measach gan hin, se sin caran rúta sealtain útaras a nálhaí, agus bha uramórir chuir seo agus fér chumal cho sábhailteas cho Eideann chomá sa burangaib.
He stole the university's mace out of cheek, possibly out of who are these intellectuals looking down on the likes of me? I, Brodie, am as good a person as there, even if I don't have a university degree. I know what good theatre is. I can keep up a conversation as good as they. I've heard them talk, and I don't think they're that much better. So we can say there's that element about it in the stealing of the mace. But the silver, of course, or the metal, the valuable quality, once it has been melted down, and of course they never found it again. That would be crucial.
Van bach gevaarlijk is fijn stug an leorlan ag gnolly le Gaelic. Hafin balíon Dùn Eideann 10 guinea de gunne le fistuchig san bí me jöne Européin. Gaat dan ik dunne juist. Vig Washington an de mean valle gleed hiike fuig os kune buachke. Men nollig shecht hier keet figet de shech, ga het de roppige John Tap.
Hyde Brown voor tap, le botteltjeug, weinig in de nolliga. Uit na zie ze boe en ze grote kaarten die we maar als de merlig hele hoe ze stijden karoppige. Is hoe dat goed maar.
One of the ways they crept down the lanes was illuminated by fish bodies. People had fish for their lunch maybe last week, but they used the silver bodies to illuminate their way down the path in a way that an aircraft might show you the way to the emergency exit.
As steug ei roppig marschen te schiete ag cross Dùn Eideann, ga kiet nog de hafen te gunne jinsig in de merlich. Het eerst gaat dan ik dunne juist. Agus a ganyan go rei roppig gunne sa napach ag heen, gar het dunne haast oudesig men deken.
Wa uwarin nog kuju, ai sei kolk roi steier en neige, gadjach I mach kolnerish en nechke, vai steias en nach is genivi gema. Agus choli gloset as na helmer. Agus jerichi, agus kunnigi ferva show, ag deske, och va Cádach rúdan a fallale erget agus gala bhéimachas na slás naras as géi.
We verrillen er oorlog bij eigen Gaelic. Zoals de gerritje dus krijg. Vallen we een enige aan doen. Je zijn een krijgt al goede zijn. Agus hij Brodie gach. Hij dan niet gaan leppen. Ach maar ga je. Grijp het aan de golle vorm de vegetarisch Gaelic. Heel lekker onjak bij de als het is stekker zo maar hele clobhsaichean gedeken. Tillige dash le ugoede bij de jano van de dijk. Agus karoppik. Ach, gaat de praten is naar bewoon.
Agus na de vier chorle, ha mi kinnig, gemige Schalten kwerig kan agus truas, gan het dunje wij wie roppige fig na heige.
Delen wij nog staan kleerhig als een watten. Wat in de sapet die wat volgen de Duitse derman. Agus at verorge maag. Na had je geen gabdischer de stij.
He had this thing about Sundays, He did a lot of his bad stuff on Sundays. Because he knew that people were at church. I mean, in these days, it was a very big thing. You had to be at church on Sunday. I don't know how religious he himself was, but he didn't seem to go as often as everybody else.
Sgeulachd Eideann agus William Brodie Sgeulachd gur daine a tiúnta go gíneid fallaf vanna nécareice gur Jekyll bríine Mìle. Agus téime na daine bheith cáide bhí gers de bhela le Mìle stoi Mìle ba thula colas gur asan gan chuach. Sé buan is ganar an old town guard of an ambolish. Sew Hyde mar is tríche van a réisio met een Gaelic, a bheith fas rolach is an sabbat. Char a chansach gan nói Deacon, a bheith cuid níide gyroed uamwysachig mar a tein.
Agus fér ó bechorgan dúa se hahan a son na mearliche ha seo glachgag, agus speke bheith gísaice mar hilig sin héin ag Hail.
Fa bach gemerlich chosaile bheith chalinist snach rodata cuid Jekyll. Cha do lwyb verle a bheith chodan sgyr gawn y gas a chritsid. Hachyd a seo fasgeit bawn Royal Mìle ag tegen hoffischen y bechwtrymige as y dwych.
Wa groch to leuch ma. Agus san renne at suas groppe gegad tanagation an Dùn Eideann.
He tried very audaciously to steal the revenues of Scotland. And he had sussed it out. He had realized there was lots of money there.
In the case of burgling the excise office, it's almost a more mixed motive than that. You can see him being egged into it by the smuggling fraternity and by crooked innkeepers and so forth. Show them. They're always trying to do us in, do them in.
Agus bach gyri cwrir doi cemar I iogat ystation agus rod y dol vristigus doiain rwyd nach ronach lechgagach no fad y doi iachinri mach safel ein dygiwchwyr.
And Brodie being given perhaps rather more drink than he knew how fully to control? In other words, we're finding that the great miscreant was in certain ways a fall guy, somebody easy to tempt.
Ag an amsio bheit office na gís bar an alapa an a daimór an a Chessel's coat ag bawn Royal Mìle. Cha Deacon a hurla a doi Conley Smith san plana a yalaf.
Húlad an thuidir seo, chanilas mne seo chiad turas raine de, a húlad an thuidir seo go mo chór gunnachin nó pistol sa bhíachcha an turas seo. Agus huarat cuitigin a chuirigar dói da pistol eingaib.
Bheit na pistolsachcha agus cultar pís de chrawn troi. Sé einslí hannig seo dáiseach go Chessel's coat leis a chultar. Char a Smith hat a chúlú agus 5 minút in a station noch an Deacon. A char a sgial is Brown. Va Brown is máchu ga gerst agus gudi ché gaster. Va drúdile is an gultar agus gawnlach a chlechkig is an féin stoi. A char a fisachge gorá loich na gís bahar James Bonner a tiluchun an office is grach. Was ra Brown conladú va nuaid I ruiore.
Agus galaf na ceirachcha suas sa dy doligianw fiarle sa niwchirachcha och ha mi núl dírach nar fad as mynnych o grong rauchachcha cónach gyr yn bialw och meistr Bonner fa sioch.
Le bonner tin na basce tynna gís bahar, va Brodie cum ar súl ag doras. Va Ainsley ag na Rìoghailchen agus va Brown agus Smith rúlacht van dea, le na gunnachin picken an Dùn.
Na begit taghste bonner wat de worst. Agus gefostan ag an duine chat a hachad. Gyw chreisach ag eber taghste, dorsan is tharraing Oslo subdistrict.
They all made a run for it. They did get away with the money. They thought they were going to get a fortune, but in actual fact they got £16, which even in these days wasn't very much. It was a fiasco.
Chushin in Ceollar fig na Mìle as ryniad dírach dhéchad na burmgaibh de ger ag dain agus héchad. Och an úrsin chaiad a mechar I chéile.
It's hardly surprising that Brodie should ultimately have been arrested for breaking into the excise office, since excise was the very thing that was cramping the style and increasing the criminality of the very place where, shall we say, he was tempted and he fell.
Chuid Brodie éid útach spatel agus chuid a seachat an línthe conna í Jean Ward. Cha ein drúdéile go taigh Smith mí holichte nach ra Brodie conna dúe. Dyniad ynta cynnych y gynnaich is an y sianach de diag y rein eichdere.
Agus cha soas a cha het car agus wat klevi holichte is bij bekken door je hoog. Als de ranike. De ranike is aan ik meloge stijse schijnes beges opera die eerst is magic takker. Hij is toch al stroot dat kwant joch uit kutjuk. En doe je wie aan mijn Christian Jekyll fataniskes.
Va dedicate keen in este talach John Brown, va kiert geleenocht gehafan le manus de gunnesebi le fistige miljoene verle eke waschen te schiete. Va bien koerstug sonne goede noen hadis haast me gelijkend Brown. Skudit a je verle ga keer ek office en giesbaar, ga jesent go office Clark en Durham.
Wel genuie nan regesne jies kaag gefege. In King's Pardon of a show, a vaihir, Iachan rig a verle way Yanu an the Hassin, an the Sassing, Nrigshin, or Ferch Lareke, Iskemige, Martiniachin to Hariist. Agus Maha, Shesho a Raine, och Hatagena Miche, och Ainsley, agus Smith. Hatagena Miche Brodie eater.
An Allah chai Ainsley, Smith, a ven agus Sharavan to goede graim. Van Deacon haast zuur.
Waar is ik toen ik begrijp tot kutussen, als je nu zijn Ainsley ergens mag gaan. Als hier gaat ze jou zijn, leer me heen soort naar macaroni het eerst, ergens geloof ik hier zijn op z'n zijn, maar vastgezet voor poeder. Als bij zo'n fijn kunjige, als je hier waarschijnlijk mag gaan ergens Ainsley, ach, gaat door de kid. Maar zijn wijs ik graag hulu. Agus, wat Jekyll is gebeurd is een vraag. Agus, René, hulu Sgeulachd kan oor zijn is aan tichig.
Va edeket keen gehafan is an fistige goedig Brodie graim, agus gaan hooter is een trondaieke. Je gaat die kutjige geen van harretjen, ach va fisek tor gebeurd trich aan de goedjig druudille. Va lian het kannachig. Va Smith kutjig in de golchurnen Durham, het torstra enyam gach merlich. Char a ruin ag Brodie ach to steal secretly from the city.
Va nuderish va der am kinnig wieg doi bij hem makariruach vat se wijschen Michael. Och, naar de galage, nach rofiuer as nach je weke, agus nach ro dies worden nicht, lish enthullig va ach gekomig a fakal.
Just after it was realized that he was guilty, or he was a suspect, a major suspect anyway, he left on a Sunday and he took the stage down to London via York, price of about 5 guineas.
Ranig Brodie Lunin de darlaatje en waarst schechtje keet fietje hoog.
Wij aan de hin, zonlachen, farre Eideann, agus na chud se vi kinech grepar na charcharik na veka hien hier se sin.
Hug verre kaarstjoch de Brodie en hem verlochga, zo gedunjes en ga tussen kinni, agus hoe de aartiga is borst in Endeavour. Hug Brodie John Dixon het heen, schudde Sgeulachd unje is skievig lichtrichen. We koudeke water wie dolk op horst liedje, ach garig het koerse, het jenu is Flanders.
And in the process, he found himself to be a fellow passenger with two Scots. He gave a false name to them, and he kind of befriended them, but he also gave them some letters to friends back home.
Vatje go vrager kele, vatje go minister hamismeinige, agus hamismeinige groferille go getje en barnich egrotjeulig konlerisch, agus na goed se vi kinnig getaal, a verre hoorn die lichtrichen woeje, gaat je kunnen doen lau, ieder hamismeinige kinjache go shurum lau.
Van Deacon je goede dat atjegus na lichtigen. Moest je een goed vergaan schuram, wat Brodie je Noland rieën. Ach, wat vis hij consul vrichten me jeun.
And of course, the Netherlands was a great maritime power. Of course, the Netherlands was the seat of smuggling. And of course, the Netherlands was really famous for work among diamond merchants and silversmiths. The Netherlands represented security, which is one reason why he fled to it when the time came.
Hij het Sgeulachd grob Brodie tichig agus ftiege bij de geun fattes fasching, waar Edinburgh John Daly ten uitjeschelle van Scholige Amerika a Amsterdam, na de geen stieg wie gekend als stuurlijk schulga, per Rob Brodie vallig. No je ranig Daly de leun voor Rob Brodie, Jens verder as wat. The gentleman he inquired for was above.
Naar de goede les naar de hikke, gro een jonge vaka rich as een hajooste, gro de januari in Homereke, jerenje, och ga je vallig aan de presse.
Lorach Daly dunje wa jiet geskippelte, agus jeel deken kenstrie. Ga je horst de Stevenson in stadhuis. Hug Daly Londen je als je in deken horst Sgeulachd gan hoeders en Bliadhna, geen je feig. Hug Mìle Rìoghail Edinburgh, als us de dunjeschen, grane jehoond in good spirits, want de Sgeulachd na weidisch huilhadisch. Edinburgh Dùn Eideann va kranchen dorcha. Jontige groen gaal die fienisch eensli, al Smiths Brodie loa heen voor gasset. Zo dolboed wat daar Hyde de gersten deken, gaan eigen fius torke skien schon een wiegetje.
Am ik kinnig nach roi fein beagris reiklechtje, heb ik fein joch, stochen nach rotunje, ik unaim wieg tunain, weer gestuit beagis joch, de gunje maar heen, och, ham is mijn gekrottunje, die schach scherev, in een allemache, weer agis garoi fein, Jelige gris aan de nooi Italialetjes mee van de priesanig humante.
Als je gehoorlijk ik Brodie agus Smith in de Jekyll fiche ten lonestel, zegt je keet fiche te hoog. Waar uw doorse goes gesorgd als je Brodie tegen een onhaddisch. Agus ga je daar maar te staan, zo'n idee gemal te Michael Hoest. Ga je raak een deken easy and confidence hoest, na hoogte uur spatial de pedikes hiete.
As de law wown, waar krochige dol zo'n moren routen bekken, maar hier met je Mìle, skroch maar zijn, jote te krochig. agus plistiús tá Hyde iad a chrachu. Agus rutan go más bhuarach iad a chrachu.
Gaat de vaat goed logach uit hariget. Gaat de goed een gogenig eeniger dunje. Wat Brodie mogel tron goes kunnen didig.
And then as he turned round, he made a magnificent leg, as they say, with the right leg spread out behind him, a very low bow towards the judges, and turns around and sees that the working class, or at least criminal class figure, Smith, who has been found guilty beside him, is blubbering. And Brodie was so annoyed that he swung his leg up and landed the unfortunate Smith a beautiful plant on the rear, which, as it were, sent him out of the court, adorning Brodie's own magnificent exit.
Gaat de vdicht spirit Brodie at ze bij feudische chdiach, weer trich gachleend in een schuin en beggars opera, agus weer geuri kutjechig, van charrit en klootjech.
When he was in the toll booth, he had a longer chain than most people. I don't know how he managed that. But he also had pen and paper. And with this pen and paper, he wrote to people saying, can you do something about me? Help me, please. And he was then thinking about transportation, which by that time was not to America anymore. It was to Botany Bay in Australia. So he obviously thought that would be a nicer option to sitting in toll booth prison or being hanged. But he didn't get any answers from any famous or important people.
Le la a chrochi a sheer glúig, há sich schenachas gur lá vec Brodie an le vitjalav a chroich in een grochige.
Glach seo mach menem na núine agus ha mis an úl gorá da ichir dunne crunneachug dauer fiskers céhróden fisker a naim me gat de crochug na mearlich an na néidjin. Och, mar gude se vi cíneach charó Brodie dolle vásach chu chotsirifsin.
Ga je horstkundig roch ek lederstuiga in de geertlaag in de daver schechtjuk keet fietje hoog. Ga je grochig, we gaan nu meeltje mode een wit krinjig as gach kernie. Hier Brodie heen kan drachig een gorbekje horst geen karretjenetje onnoors grochig diante. A ga zich zo fahmen nach de wazig je eet het.
There are many, many legends, even involving his execution. One is that his friends were going to come and rescue him, but the crowd of 40,000 was too large to let them through.
Edinburgh was the greatest medical school in the world, both at the university and in the extramural crammers or demonstrators and so forth alongside. A tremendous interest in medicine, all sorts of it. And there was, among other things, interest in the process of hanging. And some things had happened to leave people, several different cases, to assume that people could survive hanging.
Agus, hekolach gneacha eke kuitigenein gennych koller Stalinga a vagovier agus nar a Europa ma achich va an koller Stalin va seo a dul a dhéanú cíneach nach dréig búlacha hachga.
Ga je ra kutjach kun jech elke te horst kan grochetijd is zo'n roop begoemal kudit. Agus getjara hier tussen se jechat gaan oprichige agus beter geef tausig in de roop aharigig.
William Brodie siert a dash, conrag a dash in a panigas. Ga je zoals a dash, net waar kolasker a roop kerst, waar roop keradiest, waar tilges vatten. Waarschijnlijk ga je siert a dash of die in de dash. Treisterus, roop met de bij, hij zijn nog een mafig, heens mag ik gooien. Ook mag ik gooien in garen, net de bij Tolo. Hij is heel wat grappig gehad.
A French doctor was supposed to be hidden somewhere that was going to revive him as soon as his friends cut him down. They also are supposed to have rode him over the cobblestones because the bouncing up and down might revive him. So, and the last legend, of course, is that Brodie didn't die at all. His grave in Blacuch Place was found empty and he was spotted years later in Paris.
Ach, De werken grochu bij de ra gedech Deacon Brodie en of these and renown, la renown. Sgyd y hwnt eich at le werig yn yr rwyf o llawn gobwyn. A sgyd y dat pib ei edigyd na affig. Ei sannach pranag yr rop affig. Agus nid yr anig ydych rhaid ei fa mach gygoen yn y stad rhywg. Ach ba Brodie falach o brecel.
So there are all those stories swirling around just the execution. And of course, the great thing about telling them on a ghost tour is that you can just present the whole lot to your audience and they can work out which one they think is the most plausible.
The cafe downstairs was his workshop, so it doesn't look very big, but it gives you a frisson, doesn't it? If you sit there and think this is part of history, this is where the man worked and where his people worked. He lived further down the close as far as I understand. And there's an effigy of him outside the front. So you can't really avoid him when you're in Edinburgh.
Agus, Mìle Rìoghail ysgrifennu ar enam le bhaisiad Robert Louis Stevenson gan sgríomh leabhar agus gran stéitear Brodie a bheith Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Stevenson's grandfather had bought a cabinet from the Brodie workshop, which stood in the bedroom of Robert Louis Stevenson during his teenage years, right at the foot of his bed. And he kept looking at this cabinet day in, day out, night in, night out, and thinking about Brodie, and who by that time was quite a notorious character still in Edinburgh. So he kept thinking about the idea of Brodie and a double life within one person.
So if Brodie's ghost was going to walk anywhere, he might very well have walked into the dreams of the boy Robert Louis Stevenson.
And a testament to what kind of man he was is that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written 100 years after Brodie's execution, so he was obviously still famous then, and because of that he's even more famous now, and he has a pub named after him, his house is still there, and he's well loved by the tour companies.
Big sure taigh pín no drama in the Royal Mile, because give cynnych in the dunya hook enam gan the shinta show. In the Jekyll, no Hyde no miskach in the dish. On the day, can the Deacon William Brodie in the Down Valley Arcal Div.
Snairig ha flúrichens birds gachrút a muimang huarstir a tharraing luchd-turais agus Mìle Rìoghail agus hasin a cumal NM agus iavai bio a miscan huai agus a misca luchd-turais a tín seo as gach dúhich chula bliadhna. Chadid a dhéochanachach.